Hey everybody, this is Torrin. I need to break this down so that people understand. This Ben Carson, Ted Cruz thing is being exploited by the media and pundits that don't like Cruz. And they are using Ben Carson in an attempt to destroy Ted Cruz. So I'm going to break it down to things that have to be ignored by people that support Ben Carson and things that you need to know to support Ted Cruz. In order to support Ben Carson, you got to ignore the entire story. You have to ignore what actually really happened. You have to ignore the fact that Ben Carson told CNN that he was not going to South Carolina, not going to New Hampshire, that he was going for a fresh batch of clothes in Florida, then going to the prayer breakfast and taking a break from his campaign. You've got to ignore that. You also have to ignore that CNN ran that story 15 minutes before the first vote was cast. You've got to ignore that. You've also got to ignore that Ben Carson's entire staff in New Hampshire left him to volunteer for Ted Cruz. You also have to ignore that one of his main financial backers, one of his super PACs, resigned from Ben Carson's campaign to go to Ted Cruz's campaign. You've got to ignore all that. And then you really have to ignore this. You have to ignore that the CNN story was absolutely right. He went to Florida. He didn't go to New Hampshire, and he's not going to South Carolina. So if you can ignore all that, then maybe you can support Ben Carson. But you have to literally ignore the whole story about Ben Carson in order to support him. If you support Ted Cruz and you get confused, you have to understand what a caucus is. If you don't understand what a caucus is, you need to look it up. Because only if you understand what a caucus is can you slap away these fools that are telling you that Ted Cruz is guilty of voter fraud. This is the biggest crock I've ever heard in my life. You know, it's so ridiculous that I even hate talking about it. It's not voter fraud. Voter fraud is casting a vote illegally, improperly. Caucusing and election-style voting are two entirely different things. In a caucus, you're all in a room together, and you're trying to convince people in that room to vote for your candidate. That's what a caucus is. That's what caucusing is. It's not a closed ballot. Know this. Know that it's perfectly okay for people at a caucus to disseminate the news that they're hearing at the moment. That's okay. So if they hear that Ben Carson is not taking the presidential race seriously because he's going to Florida to get a change of clothes, going to the prayer breakfast, and not campaigning in the next two primary sites, they can say that. That's okay. That's within the rules. That is not voter fraud. And if somebody says that to you, just slap them upside the head because that's a crock. Ben Carson, you're being used. Well, either you're being used or you were complicit in a plot to destroy Ted Cruz. And you're in that plot with Donald Trump, who, if I remember correctly, compared you to a pedophile. I'm just saying, my man, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is not presidential. It's not. This is not what a leader does. Have you taken any responsibility at all for this story getting to CNN? Have you taken, I saw you in your news conference today. You said, well, I didn't tell CNN. Well, somebody in your staff did. Who did it? Be a leader. Find out who did it and demand, no, don't demand, you have to demand. Fire them. That's your job. You say you want Ted Cruz to do it to his people, do it to yours. Because it was your staff that told CNN that you were not going to South Carolina and not going to New Hampshire. Man up. Be a man. Stop being a follower of Donald Trump. Stop allowing people to use you to destroy a candidate whom your entire staff left to go volunteer for. Man up. Apologize. to Ted Cruz.